never thought I'd be telling this story to anyone. Hell, I barely believe it myself. But after what happened to me last October in the backwoods of northern Michigan, I can't keep quiet anymore. Maybe someone else has seen what I saw. Maybe they'll understand. My name doesn't matter. What matters is what I witnessed out there in the wilderness. I'm a retired Navy veteran, served 2 tours in Vietnam back in the day, seen my share of death and destruction, lost good friends, came home to a wife who helped me heal from all that darkness. We had 2 kids, raised them right, watched them grow up and move away to start their own lives. Then cancer took my wife 3 years ago. Just like that, the woman who'd been my anchor for 42 years was gone. The kids live in California now, got their own families. I see them maybe twice a year if I'm lucky. Christmas and maybe one other visit. It's a lonely life, but I've learned to live with it. The woods became my escape. Always loved camping and fishing, even as a kid. After my wife passed, I started taking longer trips, sometimes a week or 2 at a time. Just me, my gear, and the silence of the forest. It helps clear my head, keeps the memories from eating me alive. Last October, I decided to take one more trip before the holidays started. Halloween was coming up, then Thanksgiving, Christmas. The loneliest time of year for guys like me. Figured I'd head up to the remote areas near the Upper Peninsula, maybe do some canoeing on the rivers up there. Brought my old aluminum canoe, my camping gear, and my rifle. Always bring the rifle. You never know what kind of animals you might run into. The weather was perfect that first week, cool but not freezing, clear skies. I found a good spot about 15 miles from the nearest road, set up camp by a small clearing. There was a river about half a mile through the trees, perfect for water and fishing. I'd been there before, knew the area pretty well. First few days went just like always. Woke up at sunrise, made coffee over the fire, spent the day hiking or fishing. Evenings by the fire, reading an old paperback or just staring at the stars. It was peaceful, exactly what I needed. But things started getting weird on the 4th day. I was running low on water, so I grabbed my canteen and headed down to the river. It was mid-afternoon, sun filtering through the trees. I knew the path by heart. Follow the game trail for about 10 minutes, then head downhill toward the sound of running water. I was maybe 50 yards from the river when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, big dark shape standing near the water's edge. But then it straightened up and I realized it was standing on 2 legs, not like a bear rearing up. This thing was just standing there like a person. But it wasn't a person, it was huge. Had to be 7, maybe 8 feet tall. Covered head to toe in dark brown fur, shoulders broader than any man I'd ever seen, arms longer than they should be. It was just standing there by the water, completely still. Then it saw me. Our eyes met across that distance, and I felt something I hadn't felt since Vietnam, pure animal fear. This thing was looking at me like it was deciding whether I was a threat or prey. For maybe 2 seconds, we just stared at each other. Then it moved. Never seen anything that big move so fast. 1 second, it was by the river. The next, it was crashing through the underbrush, disappearing into the forest. Branches snapping, leaves rustling, then nothing. Complete silence. I stood there for a long time, trying to make sense of what I'd just seen. My hands were shaking as I filled my canteen. Kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those eyes watching me from the tree line. Back at camp, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear after all. Maybe the light was playing tricks on me. But I know what I saw. That thing was walking upright like a man, but it was no man. That night, sleep didn't come easy. Every little sound had me reaching for my rifle. Wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. Owls hooting sounded like calls between predators. I dozed fitfully, waking up every hour or so to check the perimeter of my camp. Around 3 in the morning, I woke up to complete silence. If you've ever spent time in the woods, you know there's always some kind of noise. Insects buzzing, small animals moving around, wind in the leaves. But right then, there was nothing. Dead silence, like the entire forest was holding its breath. That's when I knew I was being watched. I didn't move, didn't even open my eyes all the way. Just lay there in my sleeping bag, listening. My rifle was propped against the tree right next to me. I slowly moved my hand toward it. The feeling of being watched was so strong it made my skin crawl, like when you're in enemy territory and you know there's a sniper out there, but you can't see him. That same cold dread in your gut. I stayed like that for what felt like hours. Eventually, the normal forest sounds started up again. Insects, small animals moving around. Whatever had been watching me was gone. Dawn couldn't come fast enough. Next morning, I should have packed up and left. Should have trusted my instincts and gotten out of there. But curiosity killed the cat, as they say. I kept thinking about what I'd seen. Was it real? Was there really something that big living out here in the wilderness? I decided to go back to the river. This time, I brought my rifle and approached from downstream. Found a good hiding spot in some thick bushes where I could watch the area without being seen. Settled in and waited. Nothing happened for the first few hours. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when I heard them coming. Footsteps, heavy, deliberate footsteps moving through the forest. But not just one set, at least two, maybe three. They were coming from upstream following the river. I ducked lower in the bushes and tried to control my breathing. Through the leaves, I could see the spot where I'd first seen the creature yesterday. Then they appeared. Two of them, both massive, both walking upright like humans, but clearly not human. The first one was the same dark brown I'd seen before. The second was lighter, almost reddish in the sunlight. They moved with purpose, like they owned this stretch of river. And maybe they did. I watched them for almost an hour. They caught fish like nothing I'd ever seen, just reached into the water and grabbed them with their bare hands. No nets, no tools. Their reflexes were incredible, faster than any human could manage. They caught enough fish for a whole family in minutes. The way they moved was unlike anything I'd ever witnessed. In the water, they were graceful as dancers despite their massive size. The darker one would stand perfectly still in the current, then strike like lightning when a fish passed by. Never missed, not once. When they drank from the river, they cupped the water in their hands just like people would. When they communicated, it was with low grunts and hand gestures. Almost human, but not quite. The sounds they made weren't random animal noises. There was a pattern to them, a rhythm that suggested language. At one point, the lighter-colored one found something in the water. Looked like a piece of metal, maybe part of an old fishing lure. It held the object up to show the other one, turning it over in its hands like it was examining every detail. They both looked at it for a long time, making quiet clicking sounds to each other. Then the darker one took it and threw it far downstream, like they didn't want any trace of human presence in their territory. The strangest part was how intelligent they seemed. They weren't just animals following instinct. They were thinking, planning, communicating. At one point, the darker one pointed downstream and made some kind of noise to the other. They had what looked like a conversation, back and forth sounds, gestures, even what looked like disagreement. The lighter one shook its head several times before finally nodding. I realized I was watching something that wasn't supposed to exist. These creatures had their own society, their own way of doing things. They were organized, maybe even more organized than some human communities I'd seen. After they finished fishing, they did something that really threw me. They cleaned up after themselves, picked up the fish bones and scales, even smoothed out the mud where they'd been standing. Left the riverbank looking almost exactly like it had before they arrived. like they were trying to hide any evidence they'd been there. Then they did something else that made my blood run cold. The darker one looked directly at my hiding spot and made a low sound to the other. Not aggressive, more like a warning. They knew I was there, had probably known the whole time, but instead of confronting me or running away, they just gathered their fish and walked back into the forest like nothing had happened. Like they decided I wasn't worth worrying about. I stayed hidden for another 2 hours after they left, too scared to move. My legs were cramped from crouching in the bushes, but I didn't dare stand up. What if there were more of them? What if they'd left one behind to watch me? When I finally worked up the courage to leave my hiding spot, I crept down to the riverbank where they'd been fishing. I had to see for myself, had to find some proof that what I'd witnessed was real. The ground was still damp where they'd stood, and I could make out the faint impressions of their feet in the mud. The prints were enormous, had to be 18, maybe 20 inches long, wider than any human foot, with what looked like claw marks at the tips of the toes. I tried to measure one with my own boot. My size 11 looked like a child's shoe next to those prints. Whatever these things were, they were built for power, built to survive in the wilderness better than any human ever could. There were other signs too. Broken branches at about 8 feet high, way higher than any human could reach without climbing. Scratches on tree bark that looked fresh. And a smell, musky, wild, like wet animal fur, mixed with something else I couldn't identify. I took pictures with my old digital camera, though I knew they probably wouldn't come out clear. The lighting was bad and my hands were shaking too much to hold the camera steady, but I had to try to document what I'd found. As I was taking the last picture, I heard something that made me freeze. Footsteps in the forest behind me, heavy and deliberate. Someone or something was coming back. I grabbed my camera and ran. Didn't look back, didn't try to see what was following me. Just crashed through the underbrush toward my camp as fast as my old legs could carry me. Behind me, I could hear those footsteps keeping pace. Not running, just walking with those long strides that could probably cover twice the distance of my panicked scrambling. Whatever was back there wasn't in a hurry. It knew these woods better than I did, knew I couldn't really escape. I made it back to my camp and immediately started checking my gear, rifle loaded and ready. Campfire built up high so I'd have light if something came calling after dark. Extra firewood stacked within arm's reach. But nothing happened that evening. No visitors, no sounds of movement in the forest around me. Just a normal night in the woods, except for the fact that I couldn't shake the feeling I was still being watched. I tried to eat dinner, but my appetite was gone. Tried to read, but couldn't concentrate on the words. Every little sound had me reaching for my rifle. Wind in the trees sounded like breathing. Branches creaking sounded like footsteps. Around midnight, I heard them calling to each other. Low, haunting sounds echoing through the forest from different directions. One call, then an answer from somewhere else. Then another answer from a third location. They were spread out all around me, maybe a mile or more apart, but they were definitely communicating. The calls went on for about an hour. Sometimes close enough to make my tent shake with the sound, sometimes so distant I could barely hear them, but always there, always reminding me that I was surrounded. I didn't sleep at all that night. Dawn came slowly, and with it a decision. I should pack up and leave, should head home and forget this whole thing ever happened. But something kept me from breaking camp. Maybe it was stubbornness. I'd planned a week-long trip and I didn't want to cut it short. Maybe it was curiosity. I'd seen something incredible and part of me wanted to see more. Or maybe it was something else. Maybe after all these years of being alone, of feeling like I didn't belong anywhere, I'd finally found something that made me feel alive again. Even if that something was terrifying. I decided to stay one more day. The morning passed quietly. I cooked breakfast, cleaned my gear, tried to act like everything was normal, but I kept the rifle close and I made sure to stay within sight of my camp at all times. Around noon, I found their trail. It was about 100 yards from my camp, a path through the trees that I'd somehow missed before. The undergrowth was trampled down, branches broken at shoulder height for something much taller than me. This wasn't a deer trail or a bear path. This was something else entirely. I followed it for about half a mile before I lost my nerve. The trail led deeper into the forest, away from the river, toward a part of the woods I'd never explored. The trees got thicker, the shadows darker. It felt like I was walking into their territory, their home ground. And that's when I realized I wasn't just being curious anymore, I was being stupid. These creatures, whatever they were, had tolerated my presence so far. But if I started following their trails, poking around their territory, that tolerance might not last much longer. I turned around and headed back to camp, but I couldn't stop thinking about what might be at the end of that trail. Where did they live? How many of them were there? Did they have families, children, some kind of community deeper in the forest? The questions ate at me all afternoon. I stayed hidden until the sun started going down. They'd left hours earlier, disappearing back into the forest the same way they'd come. As darkness fell, I knew I had to get back to my camp. That's when I made my second mistake. I should have stayed put until morning, should have waited for daylight. But I was worried about leaving my gear unattended for too long, and I thought I knew these woods well enough to navigate in the dark. I was wrong. I'd made it maybe a quarter of the way back when I heard the first branch snap. Off to my right, maybe 50 yards away. Could have been a deer, could have been anything. But something in my gut told me it wasn't. I stopped and listened. The forest had gone quiet again. That same unnatural silence I was starting to recognize as a warning sign. No insects, no small animals, no wind in the trees. Just dead calm, like everything was holding its breath. I started walking again, faster now. My flashlight beam danced across the trees ahead of me, creating moving shadows that looked like figures lurking just out of sight. Every fallen log looked like a crouching shape. Every low branch looked like an outstretched arm. Then I heard it again, another branch breaking, this time from my left. Whatever was out there had changed position, moved to flank me. My military training kicked in. When you're being stalked by an enemy, never travel in a straight line. I changed direction, angling more toward the north, hoping to throw off whatever was following me. But it didn't work. A few minutes later, I heard movement ahead of me. Something big crashing through the underbrush, then stopping suddenly when I stopped. I was being herded, pushed away from my planned route back to camp. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure whatever was out there could hear it. My hands were slick with sweat as I gripped my rifle tighter. This felt different from the encounter at the river. This felt like a hunt. I tried to get my bearings, figure out exactly where I was. The stars were mostly blocked by the tree canopy, and in my panic, I'd lost track of which direction I was heading. The river should be somewhere to my south, my camp somewhere to the north, but in the darkness, surrounded by trees that all looked the same, I wasn't certain of anything. That's when I saw the first set of eyes. 2 points of light reflecting my flashlight beam about chest high, maybe 30 yards away. I swung the light toward them, but whatever it was ducked behind a tree before I could get a good look. Then I saw another pair of eyes, off to my left, then another to my right. They had me surrounded. I backed up against a large oak tree, trying to keep all of them in my field of view. But there were too many spread out in too wide a circle. I couldn't watch them all at once. "I know you're there," I called out, my voice cracking with fear. "I'm not here to hurt anybody. Just let me go back to my camp." The words sounded stupid as soon as I said them. like these creatures would understand English, like they cared about my intentions. But something strange happened. The eyes stopped moving. The forest went completely still. It was like they were listening, trying to understand what I'd said. Then one of them stepped into my flashlight beam. It was the lighter colored one from the river. Same massive frame, same intelligent eyes. But up close, in the harsh light of my flashlight, I could see details that made my blood run cold. Its face was more human than ape, but wrong in ways I couldn't quite explain. The proportions were off. Eyes too deep, jaw too wide, forehead sloping back at an impossible angle. When it opened its mouth, I could see teeth that were definitely not human. Too sharp, too many of them. It made a sound, not quite a growl, not quite a word, something in between. Then it tilted its head and made the sound again, like it was asking a question. I realized it was trying to communicate with me. "I don't understand," I whispered. "I don't know what you want." The creature took another step forward, close enough now that I could smell it. That same musky scent I'd noticed at the river, but stronger. Close enough that I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. It raised one massive hand and pointed behind me, back the way I'd come. Then it made that questioning sound again. It was asking why I'd been following their trail, why I'd been spying on them at the river. "I'm sorry," I said, not knowing if it could understand me, but hoping my tone would convey what words couldn't. "I was just curious. I didn't mean any harm." The creature studied me for a long moment. Then it made a different sound, longer, more complex. Almost immediately, I heard answering calls from the darkness around me. The other sets of eyes started moving again, but not toward me. They were pulling back, disappearing into the forest. The creature in front of me made one final sound, lower and more urgent, a warning. Then it too stepped back into the darkness, leaving me alone with my flashlight and my racing heart. But I wasn't really alone. I could still feel them out there, watching from the shadows, making sure I went where they wanted me to go. I started walking again, following what I hoped was the path back to my camp. Behind me, I could hear soft footsteps in the leaves, not threatening, just present. Like they were escorting me, making sure I actually left their territory. It took me another hour to find my camp, an hour of stumbling through the dark woods with the constant sensation of being watched. When I finally saw my campfire flickering through the trees, I almost cried with relief. I turned around one last time before entering my camp. In the glow from my fire, I could just make out several large shapes standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me, making sure I stayed put. I built up my fire as high as I could and sat with my back against a tree, rifle across my lap. They stayed there for most of the night, those silent watchers in the darkness. I could see their eyes reflecting the firelight, never moving, never making a sound. Around 3 a.m, they finally disappeared. I should have packed up right then and there, should have thrown everything in my truck and driven straight home. But I was exhausted, too tired to think straight. I convinced myself I'd be safe until morning. Convinced myself they'd delivered their message and would leave me alone now. I was wrong about that too. Halfway back to camp, that unnatural silence fell over the forest again. Every bird, every insect, every small animal went quiet at the same time. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. Then I heard it, a single branch snapping somewhere off to my left. Not the kind of sound a deer or rabbit makes. Something big had stepped on that branch. I unslung my rifle and flicked off the safety. The familiar weight of the weapon in my hands calmed my nerves a little. In Vietnam, my rifle had kept me alive more times than I could count. Maybe it would do the same here. But this wasn't Vietnam. This was something else entirely. I started moving again, slower now, trying to make as little noise as possible. Every few steps, I'd stop and listen. Twice more, I heard branches breaking, always from different directions. Whatever was out there was following me, maybe even circling me. The beam of my flashlight only reached about 30 feet, creating a small circle of visibility in an ocean of darkness. Beyond that circle, anything could be lurking. Anything could be watching me stumble through their territory like a lost child. I tried to remember my training from the Navy, how to move quietly in hostile territory, how to use cover effectively, how to spot an ambush before walking into it. But that training had been for fighting other humans, not whatever these things were. Another sound, this time from directly ahead, something moving through the underbrush with deliberate steps. I raised my rifle and swept the flashlight beam back and forth, trying to spot movement in the trees. Nothing, just shadows and darkness. But I knew it was there, could feel it watching me, evaluating me, deciding what to do about the intruder in its domain. My camp was only a few hundred yards away when I saw it. A massive shape standing between two trees directly in my path. Just standing there, motionless, like it was waiting for me. I raised my rifle and looked through the scope. Even in the dim light, I could make out details I wished I couldn't see. This was the same creature I'd seen at the river, the dark brown one. Up close, it was even more terrifying than I'd imagined. Its face was almost human, but not quite. Broad features, deep-set eyes that reflected what little light there was. When it saw me raise the rifle, it tilted its head slightly, like it was curious about what I was holding. Then it growled, not like any animal I'd ever heard. Deep, rumbling, coming from somewhere in its chest. The sound made my teeth ache and my hands shake. This thing was warning me, telling me I didn't belong here. It started walking toward me. Each step was deliberate, confident. This creature wasn't afraid of me or my rifle. It probably didn't even know what a rifle was. I kept the scope trained on its chest, finger on the trigger, but I didn't want to shoot. Something about the way it moved, the intelligence in its eyes, it felt wrong to just gun it down. When it was about 20 yards away, it stopped. We stared at each other across that short distance. I could see its chest rising and falling with each breath. Could see the individual hairs in its fur moving in the night breeze. Then it did something I didn't expect. It stepped behind a large oak tree, disappearing from view. For a moment, I thought maybe it had decided to leave me alone. Maybe we could both just walk away from this encounter. I was wrong again. The rock came out of nowhere. Something the size of a bowling ball came flying through the air, straight at my head. I threw myself to the side, hit the ground hard, felt the rock whistle past my ear, and crash into the tree behind me. I rolled, came up with the rifle, and fired without thinking. The muzzle flash lit up the forest for a split second. In that brief moment of light, I saw the creature stumbling backward, clutching its right arm. Dark liquid, blood, was already starting to flow between its fingers. It let out a howl that will haunt me for the rest of my life. Pure pain and rage echoing through the trees. Other howls answered from deeper in the forest. I'd hurt one of them, and now the others knew. The wounded creature looked at me one more time. Even injured, even bleeding, there was no fear in its eyes, only anger. And something else. Disappointment, maybe. Like I'd broken some kind of trust. Then it turned and vanished into the darkness. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next. I ran back to my camp, threw my gear into my pack as fast as I could, and grabbed my canoe. The whole time, I could hear movement in the forest around me, branches breaking, leaves rustling, but I couldn't see anything. They were out there watching me pack up and leave. I could feel their eyes on me. The river was my only way out. The nearest road was 15 miles through thick forest, but the river would take me downstream to a small village only about 8 miles away. In my canoe, I could make that distance in a couple hours, even in the dark. I dragged the canoe through the trees toward the water, my rifle slung across my back, pack weighing me down. Every shadow looked like one of those creatures. Every sound made me jump. When I reached the riverbank, I could hear them, movement all around me in the darkness. Heavy footsteps, branches snapping, low grunts and calls. They were surrounding me, but staying just out of sight. I threw the canoe into the water and jumped in, paddle in one hand, rifle in the other. That's when I saw them. As I pushed off from the shore, they started appearing along the riverbank. First one, then another, then more. I counted at least 6, maybe 8, all different sizes, different shades of brown and gray. A whole family maybe, or a tribe. Some of them were holding rocks, big ones they could easily throw at me. I was sitting duck in that canoe, nowhere to hide if they decided to attack. But they didn't throw the rocks. They just watched me paddle downstream, their eyes reflecting the moonlight like cat's eyes, following my progress along the bank but not attacking. Even after I'd shot one of them, they were letting me go. I couldn't understand it then, and I still can't understand it now. Maybe they recognized that I wasn't really a threat. Maybe they understood that I'd only shot in self-defense when their friend threw that rock at me. Maybe they had some kind of code about not killing unless absolutely necessary. Or maybe they just wanted me gone. And the easiest way to make that happen was to let me leave on my own. I paddled hard downstream, constantly looking over my shoulder. They followed me along the bank for almost a mile before disappearing back into the forest. The last one I saw was standing on a fallen log that extended out over the water, just watching me paddle away into the darkness. I made it to the village just after midnight, pulled my canoe up on the boat ramp, and sat there shaking for a good 10 minutes before I could trust my legs to carry me to my truck. Drove straight home without stopping. Didn't sleep for 3 days. I've been back to those woods since then. Not to the same spot, I'll never go back there, but to other areas nearby. Haven't seen any signs of them. No footprints, no broken branches arranged in strange patterns, no feeling of being watched. Maybe they moved on to a different territory. Maybe they were never really there at all, and I just had some kind of breakdown after being alone in the woods for too long. Wouldn't be the first veteran to have his mind play tricks on him. But I know what I saw. I know what I experienced. Those creatures were real, and they were intelligent. They had families, territories, their own way of communicating. They've probably been living in those forests for generations, maybe centuries, staying hidden from people like us. I think about that wounded one sometimes, wonder if it survived, if its arm healed properly. Wonder if it tells the others about the strange human who shot it and then ran away. Wonder if they remember me as a threat or just as another scared animal that wandered into their territory by mistake. The strangest part is that I don't think they wanted to hurt me. Even after I shot one of them, they let me go. They could have killed me easily, thrown rocks, attacked me in the water when I was defenseless. But they didn't. Maybe they understood that I was scared. Maybe they recognized something in me that reminded them of themselves. Just another creature trying to survive in a world that didn't always make sense. I've thought about reporting what I saw. There are groups that study this kind of thing, researchers who might be interested. But what would be the point? Even if they believe me, even if they sent teams to look for evidence, those creatures are long gone by now. They're too smart to stick around after an encounter like that. Sometimes I wonder if I should have handled things differently. Maybe if I'd approached them peacefully, tried to communicate somehow, they would have accepted me. Maybe I could have learned something about them, about how they live, what they need to survive. But I was scared and alone and faced with something I didn't understand. I reacted the way I'd been trained to react in Vietnam. Identify the threat and eliminate it. Shoot first, ask questions later. That training kept me alive in the war, but maybe it wasn't the right response to those creatures. Maybe they weren't a threat at all, just a family trying to live their lives in peace. I still go camping, but I stay closer to civilization now. State parks, campgrounds with other people around. I tell myself it's because I'm getting older, that I don't want to take risks like I used to. But the truth is, I'm afraid of running into them again. Not because I think they'll hurt me, I actually don't think they would. I'm afraid because I don't know how I'd react. Would I run again? Would I try to shoot them? Would I finally try to make peaceful contact? I don't know, and I'm not sure I want to find out. People ask me sometimes if I believe in Bigfoot, Sasquatch, whatever you want to call them. I used to say no, of course not, that's just stories and hoaxes and people seeing what they want to see. Now I just change the subject, because I know they're out there. I've seen them, shot one of them, looked into their eyes, and saw intelligence staring back at me. They're real, they're smart, and they want to be left alone. And maybe that's for the best. Maybe some things are meant to stay hidden, to live their lives without interference from us. Maybe the fact that they've managed to stay secret for so long proves that they're better at surviving than we give them credit for. I keep my rifle clean and ready just in case, not because I want to use it, but because it makes me feel safer when I'm out in the woods. It's a reminder that I survived my encounter with them once, and maybe I could survive another one if it ever came to that. But mostly, I hope it never comes to that. I hope they found a new territory, far away from hiking trails and camping spots and curious humans like me. I hope they're raising their young and teaching them to stay hidden, to avoid contact with our kind. And I hope that wounded one I shot learned to forgive me for being afraid. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I think about that moment when we first saw each other by the river. Two different species, both just trying to live our lives, both startled by an unexpected encounter. For those few seconds, there was no fear, no aggression, no violence, just recognition, one thinking being acknowledging another. Maybe that's all any of us can hope for in this world, a moment of understanding before fear and instinct take over. I shot Bigfoot, and I've regretted it every day since. Not because I think I did the wrong thing, I was defending myself against what I perceived as a threat, but because I wonder what might have happened if I'd found the courage to lower my rifle instead of raising it. Guess I'll never know now, but I'll never forget those eyes, that intelligence, that moment of recognition between two very different kinds of beings sharing the same small piece of wilderness. They're out there, somewhere, and they're probably better off staying hidden from people like me. People who react with fear instead of wonder, with violence instead of curiosity. Maybe someday someone else will have a chance to do better than I did, to meet them with open hands instead of raised weapons, with questions instead of bullets. I hope so. Because if there's one thing I learned from my encounter, it's that we're not alone on this planet. There are other intelligent beings sharing this world with us, and maybe it's time we started acting like we deserve their respect instead of their fear. But that's a lesson I learned too late to do any good. All I can do now is tell my story and hope that someone else might learn from my mistakes. If you're ever out there in the deep woods and you see something that shouldn't exist, something impossible and magnificent and terrifying all at the same time, maybe think twice before reaching for your weapon. Maybe try reaching out your hand instead. You might be surprised by what reaches back. I'm writing this because nobody believes us anymore. The sheriff thinks we're crazy. Our neighbors avoid us. Even our own kids won't return our calls. But I need to get this down on paper before something worse happens, before it's too late. My name is Daryl, and my wife Jess and I have been farming the same 240 acres in rural Oregon for 37 years. We raise cattle, grow hay, and keep to ourselves. We've seen our share of wildlife over the decades: deer, elk, the occasional black bear, even a cougar once. But what's been happening on our property for the past 8 months isn't normal, it isn't natural, and it's getting worse every single day. It started small. Last October, Jess noticed something was wrong with our chickens. We keep about 40 hens in a coop behind the barn, and they'd been laying just fine all summer. Then suddenly, we were getting maybe 6 eggs a day instead of the usual 25 or 30. The birds seemed spooked, huddling together in one corner of the coop during the day instead of roaming their run. At first, I figured it was just a fox or raccoon getting into the feed. I reinforced the fence, added some wire mesh over the top, and set up a motion-activated light. For a few weeks, things seemed to improve. The hens started laying again, and we thought we'd solve the problem. Then one morning in early November, Jess went out to collect eggs and found the coop door ripped clean off its hinges. Not broken, ripped. The hinges were still bolted to the frame, but the entire wooden door was lying in the dirt 15 feet away. The chickens were gone, all 40 of them. I examined the scene and couldn't make sense of it. There were no feathers scattered around like you'd see with a fox attack. No blood, no tracks that I could identify, though the ground was pretty torn up. Whatever had taken our chickens had simply opened the coop like it was opening a can of beans and cleared them out. The strangest part was the smell. Even 3 days later, there was this musky, sour odor hanging around the coop. It reminded me of wet dog mixed with something else I couldn't place, something wild and rank that made my stomach turn. A week after we lost the chickens, our neighbor's cattle started acting strange. Bob Martinez owns the ranch next to ours, and his cows had always been calm, docile animals. Suddenly, they were bunching up against the fence line furthest from our property, refusing to graze in the pasture that bordered our land. Bob came by to ask if we'd seen anything unusual. I told him about the chickens, and he got this look in his face like he wanted to say something but thought better of it. Finally, he mentioned that his border collie had been barking all night for the past week, always facing our direction. That afternoon, I decided to walk the fence line between our properties. The ground was still soft from recent rain, and about halfway along the border, I found them. Footprints, but not like any I'd ever seen. They were enormous, at least 18 inches long and about 8 inches wide, deeper than a human footprint would be, pressed down into the mud like whatever made them weighed far more than a person. The stride length was incredible, maybe 4 or 5 feet between prints. I followed the trail for about 100 yards before it disappeared into the thick timber on the back of our property. I took pictures with my phone, though they didn't turn out very clear. When I showed them to Bob, he went pale. He'd found similar tracks on his land the day before, but hadn't wanted to mention it. We both agreed to keep an eye out and let each other know if we saw anything else. The sound started a few nights later. Jess woke me up around 2 a.m, shaking my shoulder. Something's outside. I listened and heard it. A low rumbling noise coming from somewhere near the barn. It wasn't quite howling, wasn't quite growling. More like a cross between the two, but deeper than anything I'd heard from a wild animal. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then stopped. We have a shotgun in the bedroom closet, and I grabbed it before going to the window. Our farm sits in a valley with hills rising on 3 sides, and the moon was bright enough that I could see pretty clearly across our pastures. Nothing moved. The cattle were all bunched up at the far end of their field, as far from the barn as they could get. The sound came again, and this time I could tell it was definitely coming from behind the barn. I considered going outside to investigate, but something about that noise made my skin crawl. It was too intelligent, too purposeful, like whatever was making it was trying to communicate something. Jess suggested we call the sheriff, but what would we say? That we heard a scary noise? I decided to wait until morning and take another look around. In the daylight, I found more evidence. The big sliding door on the barn had scratches in the wood, deep gouges that looked like claw marks. They were too high up to be from any normal animal, starting about 7 feet off the ground and running down to shoulder height. Whatever had made them was tall enough to reach the top of that door while standing on the ground. Inside the barn, several hay bales had been moved. We stacked them in neat rows, but 3 bales from the back row were sitting in the middle of the floor. Each bale weighs about 50 pounds, and they'd been tossed around like they were nothing. 2 weeks later, I saw it. I was checking on our cattle early one morning when something caught my eye at the edge of the tree line, maybe 200 yards away. At first, I thought it was a person, someone standing perfectly still among the pines. But as I watched, I realized whoever it was had to be enormous. The trees in that section are old growth, some of them 40 or 50 feet tall, and this figure came up to the lower branches. I grabbed my binoculars from the truck and focused on the spot. What I saw made my blood run cold. It wasn't a person at all. The thing was covered in dark brown hair from head to foot, with arms that hung down past its knees. Its shoulders were massively broad, and its head seemed to sit directly on its torso without much of a neck. It was just standing there motionless, watching me. We stared at each other for what felt like 5 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. Then, without any sudden movement, it simply stepped backward into the trees and vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, like it had never existed at all. I drove over to that section of woods as fast as our old Ford could carry me, but by the time I reached the tree line, there was nothing to see. Just the lingering smell of that same musky odor I'd noticed around the chicken coop. When I told Jess what I'd seen, she didn't say I was imagining things. She just nodded and told me she'd been feeling like something was watching her when she hung laundry on the line. The clothesline sits between our house and the barn, with a clear view to those same woods where I'd spotted the creature. December brought our first real snow, and with it, undeniable proof that we weren't dealing with a normal animal. The creature, I'd started thinking of it as Bigfoot, though I'd never believed in such things before, left tracks everywhere. In the fresh powder, the prints were clear and detailed. You could see the outline of toes, the arch of the foot, even what looked like hair impressions around the edges. The tracks crisscrossed our entire property. They led from the woods to the barn, around our house, past the chicken coop, and back into the timber. Some mornings there would be dozens of prints like the thing had spent hours wandering around our farm in the dark. But the tracks weren't the worst part. The worst part was how close to the house they came. One morning, I found prints right outside our bedroom window. They were so close to the foundation that whatever made them would have been able to look directly through the glass if it had wanted to. The thought of that thing standing there while we slept, watching us, made me sick to my stomach. I installed motion sensor lights around the house and barn. The first night, they triggered 17 times between midnight and dawn. I'd look out the window each time the yard lit up, but I never saw anything, just the lights flashing on and off like a strobe, illuminating empty snow. By January, I knew we needed help. The situation was getting worse, not better. The creature was becoming bolder, and I was afraid it might try to break into the house. I called the county sheriff's office and explained what was happening. The deputy who answered the phone was polite but clearly skeptical. He said they'd send someone out to take a look, but it was 3 days before anyone showed up. The officer who finally came was young, maybe mid-20s, and he had that attitude that said he was humoring the crazy old farmer. I showed him the tracks in the snow, the scratches on the barn door, the bent fence posts where something heavy had leaned against them. He took a few pictures and wrote some notes, but I could tell he wasn't taking it seriously. When I mentioned seeing the actual creature, he just nodded and said they'd keep the report on file. "We get a lot of calls about bears this time of year," he said. "They can leave pretty big tracks, especially in soft snow." I tried to explain that these weren't bear tracks, that no bear stood 8 feet tall and walked upright. But he was already heading back to his patrol car, probably thinking about the story he'd tell the other deputies back at the station. We never heard from them again. The snow melted in late January, and February brought a new level of activity. The creature wasn't just passing through our property anymore, it was living here. We'd find evidence of its presence every single day. Our garbage cans, which we kept in a wooden enclosure near the house, were regularly torn apart. Not just knocked over, but completely destroyed. The metal cans were bent and twisted into shapes that would have taken incredible strength to achieve. The creature seemed particularly interested in any food scraps, but it also scattered everything else across our yard. Papers, bottles, anything that had been in those cans. I started putting the garbage inside the barn, thinking that might solve the problem. The next morning, I found that the barn sliding door had been forced open. The lock was broken and the door itself was bent on its track. Inside, the garbage was scattered just like before, but now the creature had also knocked over several shelves and torn open feed sacks. The smell was everywhere, that same musky, wild odor that seemed to follow wherever the thing went. It was strongest in the barn, like the creature had spent considerable time in there. I found what looked like a nest in one of the empty stalls made from hay and old burlap sacks. Up until March, most of the encounters had been mine. Jess had heard the sounds and seen the tracks, but she hadn't come face to face with the creature. That changed on a Tuesday morning when she went out to feed our remaining animals. We'd bought 6 new chickens to replace the ones we'd lost, and we were keeping them in a smaller, reinforced coop closer to the house. Jess went out around 7 in the morning with their feed, same as she'd done thousands of times before. When she came back inside, she was white as a sheet and shaking all over. It took me 10 minutes to get the story out of her. She'd been filling the water containers when she heard something behind her. When she turned around, the creature was standing not 20 feet away, just watching her. She described it as enormous, easily 8 feet tall, covered in dark hair that looked almost black in the morning light. Its face was like a cross between human and ape, with intelligent eyes that seemed to look right through her. They stared at each other for what she said felt like forever. Then the creature made a sound, not the howling we'd heard at night, but something almost like words. Gibberish, but with the rhythm and tone of speech, like it was trying to communicate with her. Finally, it turned and walked away, not hurrying, not skulking, just walking upright on 2 legs like a person would, except twice as big as any person had a right to be. Jess didn't go outside alone after that. March brought warmer weather and an escalation in the creature's behavior. It was no longer content to just wander around our property and go through our garbage. Now it was actively destroying things. Our fence posts started showing up snapped in half, always the ones along the back property line near the woods. These weren't old rotted posts, they were pressure-treated 6x6s that I'd installed myself just 5 years earlier. Breaking them would have required enormous strength or the right tools, and I knew it wasn't vandals because we would have heard a vehicle coming up our long gravel driveway. The creature also developed an interest in our equipment. One morning, I found our riding mower had been flipped upside down in the middle of the yard. The thing weighs over 400 pounds, and there was no mechanical way it could have ended up in that position by accident. The next week, our utility trailer was found 100 yards from where I'd parked it, with 2 of its tires completely shredded. I started putting everything mechanical inside the barn at night, but that just meant the creature found new things to destroy. It pulled down sections of our split rail fencing, scattered firewood we'd spent days stacking, and somehow managed to tear the metal roof off our small equipment shed. Each incident left behind more of that terrible smell and usually some new footprints to document what had happened. I must have taken 200 pictures by this point, but they never seemed to capture how truly massive those prints were. April brought the most terrifying incident yet. I woke up around 3 a.m. to find our dog, a German Shepherd named Rex, cowering under our bed and whimpering. Rex had always been fearless. He'd chased off bears before without hesitation. But now he was shaking like a leaf and wouldn't come out no matter how much I coaxed him. I grabbed my shotgun and went to the living room window that faces our front yard. In the moonlight, I could see a massive, dark shape moving around near our vehicles. The creature was examining my pickup truck, running its hands along the sides like it was trying to figure out what it was. As I watched, it grabbed the truck's side mirror and twisted it completely around. Then it moved to the front and placed both hands on the hood. I could see the vehicle's suspension compress under its weight as it leaned forward to peer through the windshield. The whole time I stood frozen at the window. Part of me wanted to fire a warning shot, but another part was terrified of what might happen if I provoked it. The creature was less than 50 feet from our house, and if it decided to come after us, I wasn't sure our doors and windows would stop it. After what felt like an hour but was probably only 10 minutes, the creature lost interest in the truck and wandered toward the barn. I watched until it disappeared into the shadows, then spent the rest of the night sitting in my recliner with the shotgun across my lap, waiting for dawn. In the morning, I found handprints on the truck's hood, clear impressions in the dust that were easily twice the size of my own hands. The side mirror was indeed twisted around backward, and there were new scratches in the paint where the creature had touched the vehicle. By May, I was desperate enough to try the authorities one more time. I called the state police instead of the county sheriff, thinking they might take us more seriously. I explained the entire situation to a sergeant who listened politely and said they'd send someone out to investigate. The trooper who arrived was older and more professional than the deputy we'd dealt with before. He walked around our property, examined the damage, and looked at the pictures I'd taken of the tracks. For a moment, I thought we might finally get some real help. But when I mentioned Bigfoot, his whole demeanor changed. He got that same look the first deputy had. The look that said he was dealing with a couple of delusional country folks who'd been living in isolation too long. "We'll increase our patrols in this area," he said, but I could tell he was just trying to get off our property as quickly as possible. As he drove away, I knew we were on our own. The creature's behavior changed again in June. Instead of just showing up at night, it started appearing during the day. Jess was hanging laundry on the line one afternoon when she noticed something moving in the tree line. She thought it might be a deer at first, but as she watched, a massive figure stepped out of the woods and into our back pasture. It stood there for several minutes, making no attempt to hide itself. In the bright sunlight, Jess could see details that had been hidden during previous encounters. The creature's hair was actually dark brown with patches of gray, especially around its shoulders and arms. Its face was more human-like than ape-like, with a prominent brow ridge and deep-set eyes that seemed to show intelligence. Most unsettling of all, it was watching her with what seemed like curiosity rather than aggression. It tilted its head from side to side like it was studying her, trying to understand what she was doing with the wet clothes and the rope line. Jess finished hanging the laundry as quickly as she could, never taking her eyes off the creature. When she was done, she walked slowly back toward the house, expecting it to disappear into the woods like it always did. Instead, it followed her. Not aggressively, but deliberately. It stayed about 50 yards behind her, walking upright across our pasture like it owned the place. When Jess reached the house and looked back, the creature was standing at the edge of our yard, closer to our home than it had ever been during daylight hours. She called for me, and I came running with the shotgun. By the time I reached the window, the creature was gone. but in the soft earth near where it had been standing, we found the clearest footprint yet. Every toe clearly defined, the ball and heel of the foot pressed deep into the soil. By July, the creature had become openly hostile toward anything mechanical on our property. It seemed to have developed a particular hatred for engines and motors, destroying anything that made noise or moved. Our riding mower was found one morning completely dismantled, not just broken, dismantled. The engine had been torn apart piece by piece, with parts scattered across 50 yards of pasture. The seat was ripped off, the steering wheel twisted into a pretzel, and the mower deck bent into scrap metal. The same week, our generator was destroyed. We keep it in a locked shed behind the house for emergencies, but the creature had torn the door off its hinges and reduced the generator to junk. Oil and coolant were splattered everywhere, and the engine block itself was cracked in half. I bought new locks for all our outbuildings, heavy-duty deadbolts that I thought might slow the thing down. 2 days later, every lock was ripped off along with chunks of the door frames. The creature wasn't picking locks or finding keys. It was simply overpowering anything we put in its way. Our property includes a small hunting cabin about half a mile back in the woods. I'd built it myself 15 years earlier as a place to get away and think, and we'd used it for family gatherings when the kids were younger. I hadn't been back there since the creature showed up, but in early August, curiosity got the better of me. I loaded my shotgun and hiked back through the timber, following the old trail I'd cut years before. The closer I got to the cabin, the stronger that musky smell became. By the time I could see the building through the trees, the odor was almost overwhelming. The cabin was destroyed, not damaged, destroyed. The walls had been pushed inward, the roof was collapsed, and debris was scattered everywhere. It looked like a tornado had hit it, except tornadoes don't usually leave 18-inch footprints all around the wreckage. Inside what was left of the structure, I found evidence that the creature had been living there. There was a crude bed made from pine boughs and strips of fabric that looked like they'd been torn from old clothes. Food scraps were scattered around, bones from animals it had caught, fruit peels, even some aluminum cans that must have come from our garbage. But the most disturbing discovery was the collection of items it had apparently taken from our property over the months. Tools from our barn, clothes from our laundry line, even some kitchen utensils that Jess had been missing. They were arranged almost like decorations around the makeshift shelter, as if the creature was trying to make the space more familiar or comfortable. I didn't stay long. The smell was making me nauseous, and I had the overwhelming feeling that I was trespassing in something's home. Even though it was my own property, I felt like an intruder. The creature's boldness reached a new level in August. It began approaching our house regularly, sometimes in broad daylight. We'd see it walking across our yard like it belonged there, examining our vehicles, peering into windows, and leaving those massive footprints everywhere. One afternoon, while Jess was inside making lunch, the creature walked right up to our kitchen window and looked in. She was standing at the sink, washing dishes, when she sensed something behind her. When she turned around, there it was, its face filling the entire window, those dark eyes staring directly at her from just inches away. Jess screamed and dropped the plate she was holding. The creature didn't react to the noise or the movement. It just continued watching her with what she described as intense curiosity. After maybe 10 seconds, it moved away from the window and walked toward the barn like nothing had happened. I was in town getting supplies when this occurred, and by the time I got home, Jess was in a state of near panic. She'd locked all the doors and windows and was sitting in our bedroom with my pistol in her lap. It took me an hour to calm her down enough to get the full story. That night, I nailed plywood over the kitchen window and started keeping the shotgun within reach at all times. We were no longer just dealing with a nuisance. We were living in fear. September marked a turning point. the creature's behavior shifted from curious to threatening. Instead of just watching us and going through our belongings, it started actively intimidating us. One evening, as I was bringing our remaining cattle in from the pasture, the creature emerged from the woods and began walking toward us. Not casually this time, purposefully, like it was trying to make a point. The cattle saw it coming and panicked, stampeding toward the barn and nearly trampling me in the process. I raised my shotgun and fired a warning shot into the air. The creature stopped walking but didn't retreat. It stood there in our pasture maybe 100 yards away and let out a roar that I felt in my chest. The sound was unlike anything I'd ever heard, part growl, part scream, and completely terrifying. Then it charged, not at me directly but toward our fence line. It grabbed the top rail of our wooden fence and ripped out an entire section, throwing the posts aside like they were twigs. The whole time, it kept looking at me, making sure I was watching its display of strength. After destroying about 20 feet of fencing, the creature turned and walked back into the woods. The message was clear. It could destroy our property whenever it wanted, and there wasn't much we could do to stop it. By October, exactly 1 year after the first chicken incident, our lives had become a nightmare. We were prisoners on our own property, afraid to go outside after dark and constantly watching for signs of the creature during the day. The thing had established what seemed like a regular routine. It would emerge from the woods every few days, always at dusk or in the early morning hours. Sometimes it would just walk through our yard and disappear again. Other times it would spend hours exploring our property, touching our vehicles, examining our buildings, and leaving its massive footprints everywhere. We'd started sleeping in shifts, one of us always awake to watch for movement outside. Our dog Rex had become completely useless. He'd hide under the bed the moment the sun went down and wouldn't come out until morning. Even our cattle had given up grazing in the back pastures, staying close to the barn where they felt safer. I considered selling the farm and moving somewhere else. But who would buy a property with a Bigfoot problem? And even if we found a buyer, what if the creature followed us? We felt trapped with no good options. 3 weeks ago, the situation reached a breaking point. I was in the barn doing evening chores when I heard Jess screaming from the house. I dropped everything and ran toward her voice, carrying my shotgun. When I burst through the front door, I found Jess backed into a corner of the living room, pointing toward the sliding glass door that leads to our back deck. There, pressed against the glass, were 2 massive hands. The creature was standing on our deck, trying to look inside our house. I could see its shape through the glass, enormous shoulders, a head that barely fit in the door frame, arms that seemed impossibly long. It was moving along the glass, pressing its face against different sections like it was searching for the best view inside. I raised the shotgun and aimed it at the door. The creature must have seen the movement because it stepped back and looked directly at me. For a moment that lasted forever, we stared at each other through the glass. Then slowly and deliberately, it raised one massive fist and slammed it against the door. The entire house shook. The glass didn't break, but spiderweb cracks appeared across the entire surface. The creature hit the door again and more cracks spread. I knew that on the 3rd blow, the glass would shatter and there would be nothing between us and that thing. I fired the shotgun into the air, hoping the noise would scare it away. Instead, the creature roared back, that same chest-deep sound that seemed to come from somewhere ancient and wild. It hit the door one more time, and chunks of glass fell onto our deck. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and walked away. Not running, not skulking, walking, like it had made its point and was satisfied. That was 3 weeks ago, and things have only gotten worse since then. The creature now shows up almost every night. We can hear it moving around outside, testing our doors and windows, walking on our roof, making those horrible sounds that keep us awake until dawn. Last week, it somehow got into our attic. We found footprints in the dust up there, along with more of that terrible smell. It had moved around our Christmas decorations and family photos, but it hadn't damaged anything. It was like it was trying to understand who we were, studying our belongings to learn about us. 2 nights ago, we woke up to find our front door standing wide open. Neither of us had unlocked it, and there was no sign it had been forced. The creature had somehow opened a dead-bolted door without damaging the lock or the frame. It had been inside our house while we slept. Nothing was missing or destroyed, but everything felt violated. Our home, the one place we'd felt safe, was no longer secure. The creature could come and go as it pleased, and we were powerless to stop it. Yesterday, I found something that made me decide to write this all down. In our mailbox, which sits at the end of our quarter-mile driveway, there was a piece of tree bark with scratches carved into it. The marks weren't random. They formed a pattern, almost like crude writing or symbols. I don't know what the marks mean, but their presence in our mailbox suggests the creature is trying to communicate with us. It's learning about our routines, our property, our lives. And that intelligence, combined with its incredible strength and complete fearlessness, makes it more dangerous than any wild animal. I'm 59 years old, and I've lived on this land for most of my adult life. I've dealt with droughts, floods, market crashes, and every kind of agricultural challenge you can imagine. But I've never faced anything like this. This thing, whatever it is, isn't just an animal. It's something else entirely. The authorities won't help us. Our neighbors think we're crazy. Our own family has stopped taking our calls. We're alone with this creature, and it's getting bolder every day. I'm writing this story because I need people to know what's happening here. If something happens to Jess and me, if we disappear like that hiker in Alaska or end up dead in our own home, I want there to be a record. I want people to understand that we weren't crazy or paranoid or suffering from some kind of shared delusion. There's something living in the woods behind our house, something that shouldn't exist but does. It's been watching us, learning about us, and slowly taking over our lives. And I have the terrible feeling that we haven't seen the worst of it yet. This morning, I found fresh footprints leading right up to our front door. But these weren't like the others. These prints showed the creature had been carrying something. The depth and spacing were different, like it was bearing extra weight. Sitting on our welcome mat was a dead rabbit, placed there deliberately, not torn apart like a predator would leave it, but positioned carefully, almost like an offering or a gift. I don't know what message the creature is trying to send, but the fact that it's bringing us things suggests its behavior is evolving again. Yesterday, it was content to destroy our property and intimidate us. Today, it's leaving presents. I'm afraid to think about what tomorrow might bring. As I finish writing this, the sun is setting behind the hills, and that familiar musky smell is starting to drift across our yard. Somewhere in the woods behind our house, something that shouldn't exist is waking up for another night of watching, waiting, and slowly making our lives its own. If you're reading this and you believe any part of it, please share our story. People need to know that there are things in the wilderness that science hasn't cataloged yet. Things that are intelligent, powerful, and completely unafraid of humans. And if you live in a rural area, especially near heavy timber or mountains, pay attention to your animals. Listen for sounds that don't belong. Look for tracks that are too big and too deep to be normal. Because once these things decide they're interested in you, I don't think they ever really go away. The motion sensor light just triggered in our backyard. Through the window, I can see a massive shadow moving near our barn. It's here again, and it's getting closer to the house. I'm going to put this notebook somewhere safe, somewhere the creature won't find it if something happens to us. Maybe someday someone will read this and understand what we went through. Maybe someday someone will believe us. For more interesting stories, check this out.